Good morning. My name is Debra Wallace Foreman, and I am a lot of things. I am a journalist with more than 25 years' experience. I am an author. I am a social content provider. I'm a motivational speaker. I'm a friend. I'm a daughter. I'm a sister. But the most important role in my life is that of a mother of an 11-year-old son with autism. Children with autism and special needs need a lot of extra love and patience and care. And I'm here today to talk about a new friend that my son Adam and I met a few weeks ago. Her name is Julia, and she's a 4-year-old red-haired Muppet who just joined Sesame Street 2 weeks ago. The debut of this adorable little Muppet really changed my world and the world of a lot of other children and parents, especially those with special needs. Sesame Street started 50 some years ago, and it's seen all over the world. So I want to let Julia say hi, and I'll bring her back in a little bit. She also has a book called We're Amazing 1, 2, 3. And Sesame Street realized, as most parents do, that children with special needs need to be nurtured and accepted and included, and that isn't always the case. So they did research, they interviewed a lot of parents, a lot of children, a lot of special needs groups, and they put together a program that has been very successful. I had the privilege of interviewing Stacy Gordon, the puppeteer behind Julia. Stacy has been a puppeteer since she was 14, and she's in her 40s, and she hails from Phoenix, Arizona. And I told her, I said, Stacy, when I watched the short versions of Julia's appearance and then the actual full episode where she joins Elmo and Abby Cadabby and Big Bird, I had tears in my eyes. And then she started to cry. And I've heard that from a lot of parents and neighbors and friends and people who have children and grandchildren and others on the spectrum, because, as Stacy said, parenting is a very personal thing. And when you give traits to a character that are in your own child and a lot of other kids that you love, it brings up protective emotions. And no parent wants to see their child struggle. You want your child to be happy and healthy and reach their potential. And a child with autism, just getting them through the day, through homework, through social interaction, through peer pressure, through bullying, that makes it very difficult. So Julia is a affirmation, a reaffirming, is a symbol to say, if Elmo loves her, if Big Bird accepts her, if Abby Cadabby accepts her, if the whole Sesame Street world can accept Julia, a Muppet with autism, who has some of the quirks and idiosyncrasies that my son and a lot of children with autism do, then everybody can accept our children. So she's really, really been very important to special needs parents. I had the opportunity to talk to people at Sesame Place. Their annual Autism Awareness Day is Saturday, April 28th, and they open up the park to children with autism and other special needs. And Julia will be making her debut there as a character walking around. That'll be the first place that the actual dolls will be sold. And again, it's not a doll, it's not a toy. I mean, it is, but in my view, it's a symbol. The first episode, Big Bird is very confused. He says, "Hi, Julia," and she's painting and she's not paying attention. And Big Bird runs to Elmo and says, "I don't think she likes me." And Alan, the adult on Sesame Street, and Abby Cadabby and Elmo explained to Big Bird that Julia is so absorbed in her artwork that she really didn't hear him, that sometimes you have to say to a child with autism, you have to repeat yourself over and over again to get their eye contact, to get their focus. So what they did with Julia is they gave her typical characteristics that a child with autism would have. So there was a very loud noise on Sesame Street. Same thing happens to my son. The noise is deafening to him, 10 times louder than you and I would hear it. So the Muppet got very, very upset. And so she put her hands over her ears. I used cotton balls for my son. And then they did a calming exercise where Julia did some deep breathing and talked to herself and then came back to Sesame Street. And at the end, Big Bird said, "Oh, Julia's just a little different than us. We're all different, but we can all be friends." And as a parent of a child with autism, that sort of makes me cry too, because my son does have friends, but probably not as many as a typical kid. And my son has been asked not to play typical soccer or typical t-ball or a lot of these other things because he just, quote, wouldn't fit in. And all I'm saying is you have to give children a chance to reach their potential, a chance to understand one another. So if a little boy or little girl at 3 or 4 or 5 or 20 is watching Julia on Sesame Street, she's not a regular character, she's a guest, but somebody emails the link and they see this little Muppet, hopefully there'll be a light on their that goes off above their head, a eureka moment where they say, "Oh my God, this is like the little boy in my son's class. This is like the boy we saw on the playground. This is like the little girl who had the birthday party and a lot of the kids were having a meltdown and looking confused. This is okay. It's different. It's not something I might see every day or in every class, but it's okay." And as a mom, you just want your child to be as accepted as possible and loved and nurtured, and that takes patience. And to see it in what I wrote in my story and what a lot of the quotes were, if Elmo can embrace Julia, if Big Bird can embrace Julia, if Abby Cadabby, these sweet Muppets that have entertained children for 50 years, can say, "Oh, here's Julia, and she may have these quirks, and she might not like loud noises, and she might not give me eye contact, and she might flap her arms," which is called stimming. My son runs back and forth. Other kids might repeat a favorite phrase over and over and over again. So you want your child to, this is a perfect teaching tool. You can sit down with any child of any age and watch the Sesame Street episode where Julia's introduced and say to the child, Julia has issues and she has her own quirks, she has her own things, and but that's okay, because we all have issues and we all have things that are different about us. And you don't want a cookie cutter world. You want people to excel at what they can do and be accepted and embraced and loved. And so I am just so touched by this little Muppet. I mean, who couldn't love that face? And when she came to me in the mail, I sat my son down and we watched some of the Sesame episodes with Julia. And I explained to her that Julia has some of the same characteristics that he does. And my son is 11. He doesn't really know what the word autism means. But I said Julia had autism and that she was very sensitive to noise. And she also flapped her arms when she got upset, like he runs back and forth, and that she doesn't always focus, and that sometimes she's in her own little world. And I said, you have a lot of the same characteristics, and look how cute she is, and look how lovable she is. So you translate that. If Julia has these characteristics, and we love her, and we want to play with her, and Elmo does, then that's putting a pretty big seal of approval on our children. I could not be more thrilled that Sesame Street went through the research process. This was 5 years in the making, and they invited Frank Campagna, who also has a successful blog, Autism Daddy blog. I interviewed Frank at length in New York. He's worked with Sesame for more than a dozen years, and he helped produce the program about autism that was the precursor for the TV shows. And he has a 13-year-old son with autism and many followers. It would be wonderful to check him out. It's autismdaddy.com on Facebook. And please feel free to check out my stories about autism and entertainment and social services. I'm at Wallace Media Services on Facebook. And look, I love everything that I do. I love being an entertainment writer. I love writing about social service issues. But when I write about or blog about or talk about autism or Temple Grandin or my child, it's my heart. And parenting is very, very personal, and that's why when I see Julia and I read this book to my son and I talk about, wherever I go, I say to people, did you know that there is a new character on the street, new kid on the block? Her name is Julia. She's a Muppet, and she has a very, very positive message of acceptance, of love, of patience, and loving each other for our differences in, instead of in spite of our differences. You are going to meet people in your life, friends who invite your child and to play dates and parties, or your teenager or your adult, and you're going to meet people who don't want to take the time, who don't have the patience, um, who are going to say, this is too difficult. We have to make too many accommodations. And so as a parent, I make the accommodations. I bring the apple juice, and I bring the toys, and I bring, whatever's going to help my son. But to have this adorable little tool to be able to teach children and adults of any age, to say she has characteristics of autism. Uh, Look, no two children with autism have the same behaviors or emotional makeup or intellectual makeup, but there are some key similarities that they have, and of retreating into their own world sometimes, and not really being part of ours. So to be able to sit down with my son and introduce him to Julia, it was very exciting. It was a very touching moment, and I loved interviewing the people at Sesame Workshop. They're very creative. They're very inspiring. They spent 5 years getting to the point where Julia could be on the show, and the woman who wrote the book were amazing. 123 story by Leslie Kimmelman, and I reached out to Leslie, told her how wonderful this is, and a lot of the people like Frank Campagna, Autism Daddy, and Stacy Gordon, the puppeteer, have children on the spectrum. So this was really something near and dear to their hearts. Because as a parent, you want your child to be happy, you want them to be loved, you want them to be accepted, and Julia's just the first in many things, many tools, many books. 1 in 68 children in America, school age children, has been diagnosed as having autism or autism spectrum disorder. That's thousands and thousands. And I'm sure, it's globally as well. Whatever the reasons, we don't know. Low immune system, I'm not going to go into medical issues or any of that stuff, but we love our children. We want them to be happy. And I'm going to see if I can answer a couple of questions. Somebody suggested I broadcast from Sesame on the 28th. I'm not sure I'm going to go, but actually have a wedding that day, but that's a great idea. My son does love it. My son loves Julia. First he was like, who is she? She's a girl doll. And, and he's a boy, and boys don't like things that are pink and girlish or whatever. But he embraced her. He sat down with me. We watched the first episode. We watched a couple of the shorts that were done by Frank Campagna, my autism daddy buddy. We read the book together. I don't know if my son knows he has autism or what autism exactly is, but he wears a t-shirt from the Autism Cares Foundation, the local group that he goes to a lot of activities and events. You've given me an idea, Happy Life. I think I'll bring Julia to one of the events, and I'm sure the young children and the teens and the adults will love her and embrace her. And anybody who watches these episodes online, that you should look for them. You should check out the Autism Initiative, because Sesame Workshop has always been amazing. And sure, somebody wants to see Julia. I can't do the voice, and I'm not much of a puppeteer, but she is just cute as could be. She just makes me want to give her a big, big hug. And this is the book. It's called We're Amazing 123. And they're going to be selling this initially at Sesame Place for anybody who's local to the Philadelphia area. I'm assuming, the demand will be high and you'll be able to order them online or from Sesame Workshop at some point. But I believe the whole Sesame crew took Julia to Congress shortly in recognition of Autism Awareness Month, and introduced her. And so that was why the first broadcast was on April 10th for Autism Awareness Month. And it was on 60 Minutes, and it's been in the New York Times and Washington Post. And somebody said, Sess. Thank you. I'm happy to do this. Anytime something is from your heart, it's really not, I'm happy as a journalist and as an autism mom and as somebody who loves to write and share my message. This was just the perfect blending of everything. So I thank you for listening. I'll have to bring Julia back another time. Check out the Autism Initiative online and the TV show for Sesame. It's quite heartwarming. It was very well done, very well researched. And my sister actually saw the HBO, the broadcast on 60 Minutes and brought it to my attention. And they couldn't have been more accommodating. I wrote a story for our local Bucks County Courier Times. And I thank you very much. I'm Debra Wallace Foreman, Debra Wallace. I go by all of them. I'm lots of things, a journalist, a motivational speaker, but most of all, I'm the mother of an 11-year-old child who's adorable and hyper and difficult and charming. And just like Julia, you just want to put your arms around him and give him a big, big hug. Thank you for joining me today. I really, really appreciate it.